Nick, what's happening, man? What's going on?
Hey, what's going on, man? Hey, where's Heartbreak Jake, man? He's not here today.
Yeah, he's big timing, man. He took off.
Ah,
He's going to California. Took the fam to a little Chargers Chiefs on Sunday. He was like on the sideline for the game. The kids got to fire the cannon or something after the Chargers scored, and they got to watch Patrick Mahomes do to the Chargers what he has done every single game in his entire career to the Chargers, which is break their heart late.
mhm.
So
can't
yeah, no,
can't hide that fullback money, man.
I mean,
Cannot hide the
hey,
fullback money.
look, dude, number 18. Number 18 hits, Louisiana legend, the All-American boy from the 318. Yeah, I actually, he might have funded it with his DraftKings parlays, which are just out of control. But that's a story for another day. And for the Saints, another week and another story. As, from Andy Dalton's done. He's just not seeing it. You go back to Jameis. Well, Andy Dalton comes out, and admittedly, against a Rams team that is bad as well, a battle of 3-7s. Against a Rams team that is bad, Andy Dalton is great. And the Saints team put together a really great performance, and they come away with a win. What's your start with Dalton? What's your takeaway on what this means for him and the QB race or controversy as you see it?
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna go away. I think this is probably gonna be something we're talking about for the rest of the season. I'm not necessarily sure that this game really changes your overall outlook on Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston. If you felt like Andy should be done before, I think you should probably still feel the same way now. If you felt like he should keep going, I think you should probably still feel the same way now. We know what the highs are. We know what the lows are. He played great this week. I think the variance there is that it's should be expected that he could play poorly next week. I mean, we just kind of know how this story goes. So whatever you're thinking should be cemented, and it shouldn't really be on a week-to-week basis at this point. I could see them going back to Jameis as soon as he's ready to play. I think that it's a complicated situation there. I do believe strongly that they wanted him to play this week and that there was a chance for that. And then, just kind of the medical stuff comes up and, it's a little bit weird right now, kind of how it's playing out and how it's going. I do think at some point we do see him again and that he does play. And I think they need to get a look at Jameis. And, at some point this season's going to be out of reach. And maybe that's after the bye, you go back and you say, all right, like let's evaluate Jameis and see what he can do and find out where he exists in our quarterback conversation for next year. But, I really don't think this should be a thing that's kind of based week to week on performance. If you believe Jameis should be in there, I think you should feel that way. And if you don't, you stick with Andy.
Yeah. Well, and it's probably, from an interviewing standpoint, it's probably an awful place for me to start because you're right. In some ways, it's almost not relevant. Like you should probably talk about the game itself because what I kind of said on Monday, Nick, is when you're a fan of an NFL team and you are in the position that these Saints are, you really just have to enjoy the football for the football. Like you got to kind of let go of expectations. Now, if you want to keep playing the game of like, ooh, mathematically, if this happens, they can make the play. Like that's fine, but that's a recipe for getting pretty angry, right? If you enjoy the football for the football and accept the results as they come, you're probably going to have a better time because in doing that, you do scouting. What young pieces do you like? Who is showing out? Obviously, like Caden Ellis is someone who you start to become very excited about. Viewed through that lens, Nick, what were your kind of big takeaways from Sunday's games? Like who performed that you feel really good about going forward?
Definitely Caden Ellis. I mean, I'm surprised that he's done it 2 weeks in a row now, and I'm going to need to keep seeing it over and over and over. 2019 seventh round pick. Him suddenly becoming like the best player in the NFL out of nowhere is not expected. And I'm not sure I believe it yet. I think that there's going to be a bottoming out at some point. It's just where does that bottom exist? But look, if he's 70% of this every single week and he's having 7 out of 10 performances instead of 10 out of 10 performances, you have a really good player there. And look, at some point, you got to start making decisions about who's going to be on this team next year, what your direction is. If you're peeling back a little bit and this guy gives you 4, 5, 6 more good performances the rest of the way, maybe you're looking at your linebacker position a little bit differently. And it's definitely possible that he plays the rest of the way. Pete Werner just had tightrope surgery on his ankle. So there's hope that maybe he comes back at some point, but I think it's definitely possible that he doesn't play again this year. So That's definitely something. My other takeaway too is that maybe now we can start having a slightly more rational conversations about the state of the team, at least for like 5 more days. Like
Yeah.
injuries do matter, and I think that's part of the equation, and maybe that can be something that's talked about at some point without everyone being like, you're making excuses. Like they're missing a lot of guys right now, and at one point it was like the third quarter. I look at Tripp and I'm just like, man, this is like so stupid that we're analyzing this game because you look at the crowd, the stadium's like 70% full. You look at the field, there's like 10, 11 key players out, and it just was really kind of like a preseason game. And, granted, I think it was important for them to win it. So I guess my last takeaway there is that like they stopped the season at least from spiraling completely out of control. I think if they had lost this game, I think it's very likely they lose this week to San Francisco. If you're kind of like in a place where you're just like compounding loss after loss after loss, I think some of the stuff in the locker room starts to go sideways, and maybe your head coach is in really hot water really quickly. I think that it was important to see how they came out, and I think even independent of the result, like we saw them play hard. They responded to some of the coaching. The penalties went down this week. I thought that was highly important. They missed only 8 tackles. I think it was the 4th time this season that they were below 10. So some of the stuff they worked on this week, they responded to. So that tells me that they haven't stopped paying attention to the head coach, which I think, macro, big picture, that's kind of really what we're looking at the rest of the way of the season. And so far, the signs are still positive. I had heard some, frustration and stuff, which I think is like normal workplace feelings when things aren't going well. People are going to start getting frustrated, but the fact that they came out, they stayed together, they won. I think you still have a chance of maybe keeping this thing together the rest of the way.
Well, and you had a quote sometime last week, right? Because like we were talking about, right now we can have rational conversations, and I too can be, because I don't like when I was doing radio in New Orleans, I followed the Saints probably on a more rational, deeper analytical level. I feel like my coverage here is a bit more fan based, and so I can be a bit wishy-washy, and I can fall into like the another bad loss, blow it all up, get rid of all the people. But you had a very good tweet that stuck with me. Something out of it's almost like Dante's Inferno. You call it DA's Inferno. You said, "Those who go to hell willingly tend to stay there." And so, like, with that in mind, like, what do you mean by that? Like, when people say blow it all up, get rid, like, stack assets, what do you mean by those who go to hell willingly tend to stay there?
Yeah, so I think teams that often end up in those places very quickly. I think things get away from them. Like you look at the Jets, the Lions, the Jags, and teams that aren't trying to win games, I think end up creating a very bad culture. And you end up in a place where then you're drafting players and they aren't developing because nobody in the locker room's bought in for the right reasons. You're overpaying free agents. I think guys that you can overpay, you don't want on your team because they're not there for the right reasons. And then you aren't, again, establishing that culture and your players aren't developing. And I just think when you stop trying to be successful, it's really hard to turn it on and try to be successful again. And there's just not this thing like where you bottom out and it's like, all right, we're going to get rid of everybody and we're going to draft our way back into this. Like how many, I can't name one NFL team that's actually done that and had it work out. The Bengals might be maybe the most recent example, but they got really lucky that they landed Joe Burrow. A lot of teams end up drafting Zach Wilson or Sam Darnold, or you just don't. It's not like, oh, all right, we're going to get the number 1 pick and we're going to get the culture changing, franchise changing quarterback. It just does not work out that way. So I think if you try to be a really bad team and you're like, all right, get rid of everybody, blow it up, start over, you don't get back. I just don't think that you ever really climb out of this hole because look, if you're drafting, you get 7 picks every year. If you hit on like 3 of those guys in the first 4 rounds, like that's an amazing franchise changing draft. Normally you hit on like 1, 2, maybe 2.5, you get a backup caliber player. So, okay, now you have nobody on your team. Your first round pick's under contract for 5 years. Everybody else is for 4 years. So you go 3 years down the road, you're at another crossroads draft. If you've drafted 8 good players over the last 4 years, 5 years, now 2 of them are gone and you're starting back over. So now you're back where you started. And how are you attracting people to come to your franchise if you aren't winning and your culture isn't such that you kind of, keep going? Like going to the Jags, like look at Trevor Lawrence. Like he's doing okay. I think it's very much up in the air if he becomes a good player. What if he gets drafted to Philadelphia instead? Like, is he a completely different player? Is the culture completely different? Like, I think things in football are like so interconnected that if the guy next to you isn't bought in for the right reason, it's going to be hard for you to develop and succeed because they aren't doing the things they're supposed to do. So I just think if you end up and you go out and you willingly say, like, all right, we're going to be the Cleveland Browns and we're going to find our way out of this, you got to look at the other side of the Cleveland Browns and say, like, well, how did they get out of it? Well, they never have. And,
yeah,
I just think that's just kind of where this stuff ends up far too often. Like, it's a myth that you can kind of just like rip it apart and rebuild. I think the best way, and this is going to sound so stupid, but I just think it's the truth. I think the best way to be successful is to maintain a path toward success. And you can be the Eagles and just keep trying to be good and trying to be good and trying to be good. And some years you're 8-8, or what is it now, 9-7, and some years you're a little below, some years you're a little bit ahead, and then suddenly Jalen Hurts develops and you're a good team. Or Sam Fran, like, you can be a contender almost every single year with and not have the superstar quarterback, but you're still in that mix because like you're building a good program, and then maybe it works out. And then some years when everything goes perfect, Jimmy G can get you there. Like, I think that's typically, those teams that try to stay good at least remain in the conversation. Even a team like Denver, like, they haven't been super relevant in a long time, but like they maintain themselves in the conversation and they're at least close. Like, they never completely bottom out like the Lions. I think when you become the Lions, you stay the Lions.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, I think just anecdotally, I mean, just look at the evidence, right? It tends to back up that argument. Nick, last one here. As we look at positive pieces going forward, you had an offensive line completely decimated by injury. Cesar Ruiz has been one of the bright spots of this season. Now, I did not rewatch the game, so I don't actually know. Maybe you're going to tell me he did terrible, but how do you feel like Ruiz did in an incredibly tough battle against the NFL's best D lineman in Aaron Donald?
I think within context, they did an outstanding job across the board blocking him. He was lined up pretty much over everybody. Like, Landon Young saw 14 snaps. Like, everybody kind of had a chance at Donald. They were moving him around everywhere, and I thought they did a really, really good job. I mean, if you go through it, you're going to see a handful of plays where like everybody's getting smoked, and then I think the hidden protector on the offensive line was really Andy Dalton. He was 11-12 on passes 2 seconds or less, so he kind of knew the assignment. He was getting the ball out quickly. He wasn't allowing them to really be under too much stress and not having the block too long. But I thought, again, within context, I thought everybody did a really, really good job. They doubled him on like 24 or 57 snaps. They were smart about when they slid the protection. Like, Bobby Wagner was kind of the tell throughout the game when he was on Donald's side, and they like to bring him as a pressure player. Like, they would slide the protection that way. When he was on the other side, it was kind of on the offensive lineman to be, head up against Donald because, that you got to have the extra blocker on that side to account for the blitz. And they did a really good job of like communicating that throughout the game with 3 guys out, which I think, again, if we're going to talk about how bad the coaching has been throughout the season, like, this is a game where I think coaching actually won a game. Like, they did really good on the offensive line. I thought Pete Carmichael, complain about him all you want, and I'm at the forefront of that. The 2nd and 10 runs make me want to just punch myself in the eye. But like, I think he had one of the more creative game plans that we've seen like in a while, like Sean Payton included within that with the 2 quarterback stuff. So, I think that the coaches did their job for 1 week. I don't think that means that it's guaranteed to happen again next week. But again, where they're at in the season, the fact that people are responding, coming up with new ideas, the players are responding, I think that's kind of the main thing to take away from this game. And yeah, they beat up on a bad opponent, but like that stuff's kind of independent of the result.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you said, though, you're still striving to win. And if you're going to both be bad, you want to beat the other bad teams, if indeed you are striving to create that culture. Nick Underhill at Nick_Underhill on Twitter. NewOrleans.football is the site. NewOrleans.football. Nick, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.